Thank you for joining us today. We're really happy that you were able to join this webinar. As we mentioned last week, we moved it from Thursday to Tuesday. We also have a new presenter today. We're going to be talking about her in a little while. Again, my name is Floribella Redondo. I'm the Executive Director for the Arizona Community Health Workers Association. And my co-presenter today, Kenya, can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Kenya Zuniga, and I'm working for ASHA.
Thank you. Kenya Zuniga actually is the director for the Rural Arizona CHW Workforce Development Network, and we're working together in advancing the health of rural communities. And one of the things that we talked about, as we mentioned before, is once COVID-19 hit our communities, we were really seeing the need to bring services to our underserved population, and specifically our elderly. When we started seeing that the elderly were more at risk, then we started learning more about this virus, and we knew that everybody was at risk. So we also were talking with CHWs and listening to all the concerns that they had and the stress that they were living through. So we said, okay, what can we do for our workforce, for ourselves? Because we both are also CHWs, community health workers, and we wanted to make sure that we were strong mentally and physically, and we started thinking about what can we bring and how can we offer it to everybody. So thank you again for coming today and for being part of this webinar. We're really happy that you joined us. And again, our objectives for this webinar are to identify, again, the emotional responses of community health workers who are working to address the impact of coronavirus in their communities. And second, to provide community health workers with basic tools to manage emotions caused by the coronavirus pandemic. And today's presentation is going to be provided by Millie Gomez. And a little bit about Millie. First of all, a little bit about Millie. Millie's been my collaborator and friend and partner in many of the things that we did years ago. We both served as representatives of Mexicans abroad. So we worked 3 years with the Mexican government and identifying resources in our community that can be translated and replicated in the Mexican community, and just like connecting what was happening in the US with the Mexican population, what Mexico had actually developed to make sure that they were serving the population that was migrating from Mexico to the United States and to the United States from Mexico as well. So as you can see, Millie Gomez is a bilingual national certified counselor and licensed professional counselor in the state of Arizona. She has over 15 years of experience working in the mental health field. She received her master's degree in education with an emphasis in counseling from Northern Arizona University in 2004. During this time, she provided school counseling in the Yuma area for over 7 years. In 2012, she obtained her second Master of Arts degree in community counseling from Northern Arizona University. Millie became a certified clinical trauma professional and has vast experience counseling individuals and families suffered by complex trauma and PTSD. Millie is a EMDR. Millie, you have to tell us what that is. And trained, and she is in an advanced legal level of somatic experiencing certification to further treat trauma with a body approach. Millie is also trained in DARE, I don't know, dynamic attachment repatterning experience. Millie, you have so many cool things that you're going to be talking to us about today. Thank you. Where attachment theory and somatic approaches are used to repair attachment ruptures. Furthermore, she has training in sensory, what is that? Tell me that, sensory motor, psychotherapy, mindfulness, and hypnosis. Millie is certified to provide clinical supervision by the Arizona Board of Mental Health Examiners. Hi, Millie. Millie has clinically treated several mentally ill individuals. She was an associate professor for the psychology department at Arizona Western College and taught at AWC for over 13 years. Above all, Millie's focus is to create a self-therapeutic relationship that leads to healing and growth. Millie owns a private group counseling practice in Yuma, Arizona called Latibu. Millie?
Latibille
Counseling. So, with further, Millie, thank you. So awesome. All of those, you gotta tell us everything that you are doing right now because I haven't spoken to you in years. So I'm really happy that you are able to be here today and bringing us this great information. Millie, I'm gonna give you the screen so you can start sharing your screen. Okay?
Got it. So let me. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna skip the first one.
Okay.
So do I start?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And yes, I'll be talking a little bit about all the different approaches that you read that I'm trained on, because they do have a very good foundation on how to understand when people are in crisis. So today I'll be talking a little bit about what crisis prevention is, what to do once we are in a crisis, and how far can we help someone without putting ourselves at risk, which is something I feel is really important, because sometimes with our desire to help, we forget about ourselves and we put ourselves in a situation where it can be traumatic for us. So I feel that's important. So I'm not gonna read my bio again. So when we talk about, as you guys heard, I'm trained in trauma. That is mainly what I do. That is where most of my training comes from. And when people hear the word trauma, I think there's a big stigma around it. When in reality, trauma is everywhere, especially right now in the situation we're in. It's what we call collective trauma. All of us are going through a difficult situation. COVID-19 has put us in a situation where we feel hopeless, helpless. We feel trapped in our houses. We lost a lot of our coping skills. We can't go out to walk, the park, the gym, shopping, all these things. So right now, we're all experiencing a traumatic event. The difference is that not everyone's gonna be traumatized by it. And that is something that is important to differentiate. Just because you go through something difficult doesn't mean that you will be traumatized by it. And I'll be talking a little bit more about what that means. But understanding the difference is important, because many times people think that because they went through something difficult, that is already means that they're traumatized by it, and not necessarily. So when we're talking about the importance of being prepared. So we know that trauma, that generally now we accept that we have populations that are very susceptible at being traumatized. And when we talk about that, at being in crisis, we're talking about the elderly, we're talking about minorities, we're talking about oppressed groups, we're talking about children who already are at a higher level of risk of being traumatized. So, and usually some of these populations already are functioning at a high level of stress. So that in itself, when you add on other stressors, you can imagine how much easier it is to go into a crisis. So we know from studies that people who come with a history of trauma, people who come with a childhood in where there was a lot of stress, will have long-lasting effects in the way that they think, in how they view life, in how they view others, in how they view themselves, and how their personality develops, and the coping skills they have, and the capacity they have to deal with stress. So when we look at all these factors, then we're able to, just by knowing that, especially if you already know a client that has this history and then belongs to one of these very vulnerable populations, you can kind of assess already that this person has a smaller window of tolerance for stress, and that it's a lot easier for them to go into a crisis. So there's a lot of factors that kind of play when we're talking about these situations. So when we're talking about crises, there's several characteristics. So here in the US, we have our book that helps us diagnose people, and that is the DSM-5. And in this book, to be totally honest with you, I think that if we really read it, we all qualify in one way or another in one of those diagnoses. So people usually feel that if they read it, they'll fall into one of the categories. I think we all do, depending on where our emotional state is. But when we're talking about crises and their stress level, we're talking about events that may generate a traumatic stress and require a intervention. We're talking about the event or learned about the event. So it's someone that got to witness the event, or someone that just learned about it. They were not present, they didn't witness it, but they learned about it. So just from that, somebody can be traumatized. And that is important. Why? Especially right now. And one of the things that I've been telling all of my clients is to watch how much information they're taking in from the news. You are learning all this information, and it's so much. What the information that we're learning, it's about having time to digest the information. So if you're just bombarding yourself with all this information constantly, you are likely to experience trauma then, because it's too much. We can't process it all. So be mindful of that a way to protect yourself, to prevent further trauma or more trauma in this situation. Right now, in the situation we are in with COVID-19, it's really minimizing the amount of information you are exposed to. And one thing that I'm telling my clients is that to have even a time where saying at 8 o'clock at night, I'll go in and I'll watch the news for an hour. I wouldn't do it at night because then you go to sleep and you go in with all these things. So if you can do it in the morning, that's better because it gives you a little bit more time to digest. But that's what we're talking about. And when we talk about trauma, we're talking a crisis, we're talking about extremely negative events that are uncontrollable and unpredictable. Again, the situation that we're in right now, it's really about what can I do right now to prevent further exposure and further trauma. We all carry trauma at some level. We all have gone through difficult situations. And those situations leave us with tools and leave us with ways of adapting. Some of those adaptations and some of those tools might not be the best, but they work. And that's something that we also have to be mindful of about those situations. So just make sure that you're paying attention to all this as we're moving through what's going to happen in these very unpredictable times. So what classifies a crisis? So we're talking about severe illness or an injury, a violent or unexpected death, something that is threatening your life or the life of others, war, terrorism, natural disasters, anything that is a threat to your safety can be traumatic. So we're talking about rape, sexual abuse, assault, physical abuse, emotional and psychological abuse, but there's many, many other categories. In these categories that I just talked about, it's what we call big T trauma. These are the big events that we all could agree that could be traumatizing. Later on, I'll be talking a little bit about the other events that we don't consider them big. We actually call them small T trauma, but by no means are they small in the effects that they have on the person. So just so that you can kind of understand what all this is coming from, but these are the big events. They're smaller events that will have the same effect in your body. And when I mean in your body, I mean causing anxiety, depression, physiologically, maybe long-term causing illnesses that I probably won't have time to go over, but you can get an idea of what a person can go through when they experience something like this. So when we're talking about a crisis, we're talking more than just someone who is stressed out. We're talking about someone that doesn't need to have a history of mental illnesses. Many times people think that only people who have a history of mental illnesses are the ones that are going to have a crisis, but it has nothing to do with that. And it doesn't have to be also any situation. It could be any situation. It doesn't have to be where the person's life is in danger. And that's another thing to remember, that it is about what the person and the experience the person is going through. So it's really a temporary state of being upset, of disorganized behaviors, which means that a lot of what the things that they're doing don't quite make a lot of sense. It's not what the person will usually do, but that these behaviors in some sort of way are helping the person cope with the stress and distress that is happening at that particular time. And we all have those ways of coping. The more mindful that we become of what are those tools that we use, again, it's about prevention. If I see myself using that more often, then that probably is telling me that my stress level is increasing. And now I have to pay a little bit more attention about what can I do for myself? What can I do to help myself? Can I reach out for support? What do I need at this moment to help me feel calmer and safer so that I don't go into an actual crisis? So when we talk about the different types of stress, there's different types of stress, and not like I was talking about earlier, not everyone that goes in through something that is traumatic will develop trauma. So we have the normal stress. And this is, we all have stress. There's no way, if you're alive, you're experiencing some sort of level of stress. So we have that normal day-to-day stress where that person is still able to cope. They can use their coping skills. They know how to manage their emotions. They can think positive. They can look at, you know, the light at the end of the tunnel. They can work with their emotions. That's someone that you could say notices the stress, but is manageable. If something happens, and that's where we call acute stress, if something happens to a person, and this level of stress lasts longer than 2 days, because I can be worried and the worry will go away and I can understand, then that's my normal stress. Acute stress, we're talking about something that is with me for more than 2 days, but less than 30 days. So something that's stressful happened to me. And now I'm having a really hard time coping with my day-to-day things. I might be late to work, by having a hard time sleeping at night, waking up in the morning. I don't want to hang out with anybody. I isolate myself. I'm more quiet. So there's definitely a significant change in the way that I behave on my day-to-day, situations. And if those symptoms continue for more than 30 days, that's when we diagnose with PTSD. So and that's kind of like the timeline that we have. I come across a lot of people who they hear PTSD, but they don't associate it with themselves. But when we start looking at their history and their symptoms, we're able to see that a lot of people have what we call complex trauma, which means that in their lifetime, they went through a lot of crises and no one was there to offer the right support. So they've been an accumulation of them. So when we're talking about PTSD, we're talking about somebody that might feel like they are re-experiencing the event. They avoid talking about the event. They might have nightmares, panic attacks. They might suffer from a lot of depression or anxiety. There's a big scope of things. And no two people who experience a similar event might react the same way. So don't try to compare, like I always say, like if you and I are witnessing something or experience the same event at the same moment, it's very unlikely that we will develop the same symptoms, because I have my own history, you have your own history, and I have different coping tools and skills than you do. So all that is going to play a factor. And also our support. If I have a big support group and I'm able to go to them and they will offer the support that I need, very unlikely that I might develop PTSD. But if I go home and I don't have anybody to talk to, I don't have a whole lot of friends, and the friends I have, I don't feel very comfortable talking about what just happened, and I just start keeping all that to myself, very likely it is that I might develop PTSD from a very distressful event. There's a researcher, book writer, trainer named Peter Levine, and he always says that it is not the event that causes the trauma, is the lack of an empathic witness. So having someone that can understand and be there for you makes a huge difference when we're talking about crises. So let's see. So let me see. I want to check if there are any questions. Who's seen address and prices up? Okay. I was just gonna look at different questions that were bringing up. Okay. Some people are talking about anxiety and panic attacks, being very emotional and hard to calm down. Okay, tools for that. I'll go over a few tools on how to address when people are dysregulated, because that's what we call people being dysregulated. And then there's some really interesting questions. Okay. Yes, and you know, this, like I said, this situation that we're in, we're barely seeing the beginning of the mental health effects that is going to cause in our communities, in our nation, in this world. There's a lot of grief going on, and a lot of those families are not being able to process that grief. So there's going to be a big need for support as we move through. So what is a crisis? So a crisis is defined by the person. And that's something that many people miss, because again, I might consider something very traumatic, but my neighbor might not. And then if my neighbor says, well, Millie, you're just exaggerating, then they're just minimizing my experience. So it's really about, can I understand that for this person at this moment, this is a crisis, and not judge it by my own view and my own experience and my own history. But a crisis is that, it's defined by the person, and it's really a situation that exceeds the person's capacity to cope. There's different services that are available for people in their communities. I can't talk about what's available in your community. I'm from Arizona. I live in Yuma. I know what's available here. And I know in some places where you're at, there might be very similar services. But again, I cannot guarantee that. So I'm gonna go just kind of over what is usually available for people and what happens when you do reach out for help. When you're having to help someone in a crisis, the insurance or enrollment in an insurance does not matter. At that moment, the goal of the crisis intervention is really about preventing this person from hurting themselves or hurting others when it gets to that point at that level of crisis. So, and this is where, if you work with people, you're very likely to come across some of these situations. I mean, if even your family, a lot of times we're in certain situations and even that situation might exceed our capacity to help the person. And we might need to reach out to other services to help us manage that specific situation. So some of the things that are available out there, there's telephone assistance. You call someone, you explain to them what is going on, and they do an assessment of how things are, and they'll start directing you to what you can do. Many times it might be that the person just needs to talk to someone, and after talking to that person, or if they refer them to another line where there will be someone there to assist them emotionally, and then do a follow-up of calls days after, that might be the only thing the person needs. There are community crisis teams where you have a team that will receive a call from one of these phone emergency numbers and say, there's this person with this situation, can you go get it checked out? And this team will go in into your home address, and sometimes at the hospital, depending on the situation, and do an assessment and decide what is the best treatment for this person. There are 24-hour observation units. And again, these are units where the person, if they need to be seen by a medical provider, usually a psychiatrist, is probably the best option to do, because we know that within those 24 hours, this person will be seen and assessed and then decide what is the best option for them. And obviously we have the hospitals, 911. If none of the other options above work, then obviously that's the only other option we have, to call 911 and to let them assess the situation. So when we are going into a crisis and we're looking at doing a screening and doing assessments and deciding if this person needs counseling, if they need medication, if they need to be stabilized in medication, if they're going to be, there's a need to be hospitalized. There's different components. None of these are for someone that is not trained. If you already feel that this person I cannot help or exceeds my capacity because I'm not trained, or because I don't want to expose myself to further trauma that I already have, then I have to get assistance. And that is important to do. And I say it to people, even as a therapist, I'll come across certain cases that I know that because of my own history and what I bring into the table when I meet with someone, that are harder for me to deal with. And in those situations, I have to reach out to other therapists and say, hey, can you take this case? Because this is going to take a big tax on me. And I can't do that because it will be unfair to the other person, because they need a lot better care than the one I can provide. And it's being able for you to also assess, what are those tools and what are you bringing and how much I can help this person. And then it's nothing to be ashamed of, or because you can help the person. Because again, it comes down to, have I been trained? Do I have the tools? And all these other factors, more than just saying, oh, I don't know how to deal with this. So when we have someone that is driving to the person's house to do an assessment, they will take care of all that. They will make sure that they're providing that for that specific person. So we're talking about offering support, going to the person's house, looking for treatment needs, and doing that follow-up. If one of the, if that's a client of ours, obviously we would have to offer some kind of support to make sure that they are following up on what it was recommended, that they're going to the appointments that might have been given to them. And that's the kind of support that we can do. And just doing those, daily or weekly check-ins on how they're doing. Aside from that, it's knowing, how much you can do for someone, but at the same time, knowing that as much as we would like to help everyone, there's only a certain we can only go so far. So I hope I'm making sense. So I know there's more questions. So I don't know if we want to take a little bit of time and just because I know we're kind of halfway through, and I want to give people the opportunity to ask a couple questions and just kind of see if there's anything else that they want to know a little bit more about. So let's see. So we're talking, well, they're in their home. There it goes. Okay, I will definitely go into the physiological arousal. People are wanting to know that in a little bit more because I know it's it's one of the things that I make a huge emphasis with people. So I'll definitely go over that. Somebody's asking about that. Well, and there's another really good question here that talks about what if you're witnessing a lot of distress at home and how can you help with what is going on? And that's another situation right now with what we're going through, is that we have a lot of situations in where people are not trapped, but you're having to be at home a lot more time. And if you don't get along with your family, if there was already domestic violence, if there was a lot of stress, and now we're having to be home a lot more with people who we don't have a good communication with, it's difficult. And the question asks, how can we work with the triggers? I wish there was an easier way to answer that, because in reality, every person is going to be different. And that's part of what working with people, I always tell people I come across. Psychology is an art and a science. It's science because a lot of the stuff we know and implement, there's research behind it, and we understand what works for the majority of people. But it's an art because I have to find out what works for you. I have to help you find out what works for you. So, and that is the hard part, because people want do A, B, and C, and then you're gonna feel better. But I will be lying to you if I say that that's what it is for everyone. I don't know what works for you or your neighbor, or it's about really finding out what works for that person. So you might have to try 20 different things until you find the one that this one is the one that helps. So I'll be talking a little bit further down about our physiology and really understanding where our physiology is, to try to see how I can manage the activations in my body, the activations in my nervous system when I come out of my window of tolerance, because there's so much going on around me. So, how can I help someone who's having an anxiety panic attack? And that's when somebody's already having a panic attack, there's not a whole lot you can do. You just have to write it out. And it's really about prevention. And I'm gonna probably sound like a broken record, but it's really about what can I notice the increase in panic attacks don't come out of nowhere. Can I notice the increase in anxiety every hour or every day? Because a panic attack is really just saying it was too much. There's so much going on, and my body needs to react to it. And that's what it is. So if you are doing things prior to it, the meditation, the breathing exercises, all those things, once the panic attack is there, are not going to help. The person is already on a certain level, their physiological level is so high that you just have to write it out. But you can do things prior to it. And that's the part where people have to learn a new language. And that's what I always tell them. Learning to listen to your body is like learning a new language. So think about it that way. If you are bilingual, or if you wanted to learn a new language, it takes a lot of practice. It's gonna take time, and you're gonna mess up a lot. But it's that persistence of really knowing how to listen to your bodies so that you can know when is my stress level increasing, my anxiety increasing, so I can do the breathing exercises when I notice the changes, so that I don't end up with a panic attack. And by then, it'll be the tools won't be enough for me to calm down. So there's a lot that needs to be done prior to, because by then, you know, other than, I mean, I can give you like grabbing an ice cube and holding it in your hand to try to make your body get out of that panic attack faster. That could be a way. I do that a lot with my clients. I tell them, go to the fridge, grab a couple ice cubes and hold them in your hand until they melt. And that allows your body to kind of do a check-in of like, oh, what's going on, to get them out of the panic attack or reduce the amount of time they have that panic attack. And it could be also a way to treat PTSD because it brings them back to the here and now. My mind doesn't connect with a previous memory. If the ice is burning my hand, I'll come back to it and realize, oh, this is where I'm at this moment. This is how I'm feeling. And it should help shorten the life of that panic attack or disassociation period. Okay. A lot of questions, so try to go further, and I'll try to save some of the questions, and maybe next time I can prepare something along the line. So with some of the questions that are being asked. So just one more, it says, is there anything I can do when both parents have had trauma in their lives and they have a small child with special needs? Ooh, that's a difficult one. And DCA's case, and they're not getting help they need, and the child is being traumatized by their actions. Those are the difficult situations, because if you're working with people, we're mandated reporters, and that's not the fun part of our job. But we have to assess and look at the well-being of that vulnerable person or child. And if there's already a DCS case open, it's really communicating with that social worker and seeing what can be done to better support that family. And if not, to really look at, how is this child being affected by it? If there's going to be a lot of support, I don't have time to go into what we call intergenerational trauma, which is the trauma that gets passed on to us by our parents and grandparents and our ancestors, if you will. There's so much that goes on, and it's so ingrained, and even in our DNA, that it's not an easy fix. As I said, I wish I could tell you that trauma work was easy, crisis work is easy, but it's not. There's a lot of effort that goes into it, and it's lifelong. Just because I get that a lot of times, like, I already worked through it, it's not gonna come up. And then 20 years later, the person's like, wow, I thought I was done with that specific moment or situation, but I'm having reactions again. And there's really no end point when we're doing healing work or emotional work. So when we're talking about an actual framework, when it comes to crises, this is a model that is used a lot, the PREPARE model. So we're talking about prevention and being prepared. And that's kind of like what I've been talking about. How can we prevent the escalation? How can we catch something before it gets to that point? And that's where checking in with our families, with ourselves, and really understanding the micro changes, which I know that takes practice. That really is, but understanding the very small changes and really being open about asking people, like, you know, what would be a difficult situation for you? Or during the past, how have you dealt with a difficult situation? What has happened? How have you tried to cope? Who is part of your support group? Do you reach out? Do you feel comfortable asking for help? All of these questions will give you ideas about how this person might react during a crisis, and are they going to reach out for help, so that you can better prepare in case you do have a crisis. And if you are already in the middle of the crisis, which then you would just have to reaffirm that there's safety, that they are safe, the people who they live with are safe, that they're not wanting to hurt themselves or others. And you might find that a lot of people tell you, I just feel very hopeless. I'm just really angry at everyone, but I don't want to go and, punch my neighbor, or go and, drive 100 miles on the freeway, or I don't want to hurt myself. I'm just not feeling like, life matters at this moment. Having those conversations, a lot of times that's all that needs to happen, because the person being able to voice it and share it with someone, and then that might all they need. And if they tell you know what, this really helped, I feel much better, thank you for listening, you've done that part of that preventative work. And you ask the person, who can I check on you tomorrow and just kind of see how you're doing? Can you tell me, like, who can you call, just to, not to tell them what's happened, but just so that you can, like, just check in with them. Is there a friend that you can call and just kind of reconnect, or just ask them how they're doing, or just get a feeling of, okay, is this person safe enough to be left at their house? And if you have a feeling that they're not, I always say it's better to overreact than underreact. So if you feel that, no, I still don't feel comfortable, then that's where you would let someone else take over and say, okay, I'm going to have to get help and see what other help is provided. Some people are not going to like it, and that's okay. That's what I tell people. That's a big part of my job. I tell them since the very first day that I meet them, part of my job is making sure that you're safe and others are safe. So I might have to make decisions at times that you're not going to like, because I'm trying to keep you safe, or I'm trying to keep other people safe. And I make it very straightforward since the very beginning. So they'll know that if that time comes, I had already talked to them about this. And some might get frustrated with me and upset, but then we're able to repair that trust of, I disclose this to you because you keep saying, you restate that I did this because I want to keep you safe. And that was the only way I could do that at that time or at that moment. So then you have the mental health providers take over, where they will do an evaluation, a risk assessment, that's what we call it, and decide if this person, where are they on a risk level. They'll provide the interventions that are appropriate for that risk level, and then they'll respond with, how can we better support you? What psychological needs do you have, and how can we provide that for you? And then they reassess, is this working for this person or not? And then they'll change their plan, or they'll keep it the same. And when we are distressed or in a crisis, something that to remember is that our brain does not have the capacity to see logic, the positive of consequences. That is physiologically impossible. So you trying to say someone, stay positive, look at the bright side, see all these things that are going to happen. Once a person is in distress and in crisis, none of that matters. And I don't know how many of you have seen, but there's, you see online sometimes that nobody has ever calmed down from being told calm down. And it's really true. Once somebody's in that level of distress, what you need to do is be there and try to assist as much as possible. Because our brain, it's already hijacked. Our amygdala is saying, I'm in danger. My only worry right now is for me to survive. And survive might mean I just don't want to feel the pain. So keep that in mind, because logic and positivity don't exist. They're not online when somebody's in crisis. So when we talk about types of trauma, we're talking about different categories. And like I said, I could go on and talk hours about this, but we have the big T trauma, which if you see here are the sexual, physical, emotional abuse, war, but there's other types of trauma that we don't talk about. I talked about intergenerational trauma, which is the trauma passed on from family to family. Prenatal trauma, which is if my mom was under a lot of distress when she was pregnant with me, I was exposed to a lot of stress hormones before I was even here. So that already put me in a different physiological state. And now I'm more prone to develop anxiety or depression and all these things. There's birth trauma, which is when I'm being born, were there any complications? Because that will, again, put us at a different category of risk. There is early trauma, which is the trauma that happens from birth to 5 years old. There's shock trauma, which kind of are like accidents, car accidents. There's those one-time events where it was just like too much. There's medical trauma. Medical trauma talks about the medical procedures that are traumatic for our bodies. Even though we might know that we need the surgery, our body still registers that as a threat. So there's a lot that comes with it. Usually after people have surgeries or prior to surgeries, there's a lot that goes on physiologically. So again, it could be traumatic. And then we're talking about oppression and racism with racialized trauma. So there's a big category of that. The other thing that somebody asked about, and I'm gonna have to go really fast, is the window of tolerance. So I know I might not have enough time to talk to you about it, but go and Google it. There's a ton of information out there. But if you can understand the window of tolerance in yourself and in someone else, you have half of the battle won. We all want to be in the middle, able to regulate emotions, which is our social engagement zone, or we call it the rest and digest. I can rest and digest my food, which is I'm calmer, I can connect with people. And you see the different capacities that we have when we're in that zone. I'm able to think, solve problems, engage. I can recognize my feelings. I can use my coping skills. I can seek help. I set boundaries. I can sleep. So that's the zone we all hope to be in. When I have too much going on, I'll go into my fight or flight, which is the hyper arousal. So I'm irritable. There's a lot of anger that comes out, panic. I'm impulsive. I'm fidgety, restless. I have the anxiety. I'm more prone to doing things that are risky, racing thoughts. And then if that is there for too long, my body will decide this is too much for me, and it'll go into a freeze response, which is the hyperarousal, which means my body's shutting down. It's the depression. It's saying, I was there too long. Now I'm trying to protect myself by going into depression. So I feel numb, I isolate, no energy, no motivation. I disassociate, which means I spaced out. I daydream a lot. I have memory problems. I disconnect from, again, spacing out, and I feel hopeless. So knowing in what state a person is really helps, and knowing where you usually tend to be too. Because our nervous systems communicate with one another. And if I'm in the middle and I'm conscious that you're not, I can try to use my own body and my own physiology and my own nervous system to try to help you calm down. But if in that same place, I don't have that capacity and I join you into, oh my God, this is too much, I don't know what to do, then you have two people who are dysregulated and they're gonna feel like this is too much. So when we're talking about crises, honestly, one of the best things that you can do is have a regulated nervous system, which means that I know my emotions, I can regulate them, I have good coping skills, and I'm able to provide that to this person to help them manage what is going on. So it's not just about the other, it's about you too and what you're doing for yourself to try to help others. We cannot help everyone if we're not helping ourselves. So we talked about safety and holding space, kind of like in the middle of all this, but again, this is kind of like the same thing with the window of tolerance. When somebody feels safe, they breathe normal, they feel calm, their tone of voice is, there's reciprocity too. That's the term where it's not too high, it's not too low. They're just having this nice rhythm to their voice. Their facial expressions, you can see that you can see their emotions. They're easy to identify. They can think, they can plan, they come up with options, they can ask for help, they're curious. Fight or flight, again, we talked about it. I'm upset, I react quickly, my breathing is very shallow or heavy, my body is tense, I can't think, I feel like I'm going to explode, I'm very loud, I might be yelling, I can't sit, I can be still. And then the freeze. I feel very slow to react, I can't think, my mind is foggy, I feel like I just want to go and hide. I feel hopeless. My tone of voice is very monotone. So I have the same rhythm that doesn't quite change. That kind of tone of voice, my facial expressions might be very flat, so you don't get to see a whole lot of facial expressions. I might feel cold, frozen, and there's sadness. And I talked about, so that's kind of like when you're looking at the physiology and where all this is at when it comes to crises and safety. And obviously we want to be able to hold space for people when they are in crisis. And really what it means, holding space, not just when people are in crisis. I think we just need people to be able to hold space for us all the time. But this is a skill that needs to be developed. And it's a skill that we're not taught often. It's something that we have to consciously learn by being aware of how we communicate. So when we're talking about holding space, if I come and I talk to you and I tell you how I'm feeling, I want to be able to know that you're paying attention to me, that you accept me as I come to you, that there's no judgment, that you're showing compassion, that you're not trying to say, oh, I went through the same thing, I understand what you're going through, and then you start talking about how you made it through, and that you make it safe for me. So it's really about, can you just sit there and witness me struggling and offer support? And a lot of times people tell me, people want to fix me so quick, like if it was that easy. And if you feel the impulse of saying, you know, I have an idea on how to help you, just say that. Are you interested in knowing how I see things? Would you like to hear what I think about this? And they might say yes, or they might say no. It's really up to them, but offer that. Don't just kind of say, here's the solution, because then people feel very misunderstood. But when you come from that place of like, look, I have this, if you want it, it's very much, it's accepted a lot easier, and it comes more from a place of compassion, more than I think something's wrong with you, and here I offer you a solution. So I did this thinking that this could be something for you to look at and just kind of understand. This could be your model of how to deal with mid-level crises. So we're not talking about moderate or severe, just mid-level crises where people, you could say they're still coping very well, but you can see that there's some distress. So you make sure that they're safe and that they feel safe. You evaluate what are their internal and external resources. What kind of support do you have? What things do you do to manage the emotions? Can you ask for help? Who are your friends? Who's there for you? You assess what's there available for them, and then you make referrals to the community, to medical doctors. You offer them the information, and then you just ensure and follow up and make sure that they're connecting to those resources. It's really about educating, empowering the client. So this is what I thought it could be, a crisis intervention and prevention for you. What are the consequences of untreated trauma? We talked about it. There's the anxiety, the depression, the mood-related disorder, the sleep problems, eating habits change, long-term health problems, and that's a completely different category. We know now that people who don't deal with their trauma will develop chronic illnesses. So obviously, the sooner that you do that, the less likely that you're to put your body under so much distress that it ends up developing an illness. And obviously, substance abuse and other addictions also come because that's the only way we're learning how to cope. I put some crisis numbers for you. The National Suicide Prevention Line, Domestic Violence Line. For the LGBTQ community, there's a specific line where they will be able to offer more trauma-informed resources. There's the National Sexual Assault Hotline, and there's the text crisis line. So those are nationwide that are handy to have. I literally keep them with me all the time because either I give them to the person as, look, in case you ever need this, here it is. But it's just a good way of knowing, okay, I provided this information and I have them. And again, it's about empowering and educating the people that we work with. And if you want to learn more about the stuff I've been talking about, I have a Facebook page and I have an Instagram page. I try to do daily postings and all I talk about is trauma, all of it. I relate everything to trauma. So if you want to understand more on how to work with people who have trauma, how to understand your own trauma, I encourage you to go and take a look at it. I try to explain things in a simple way. Many times it doesn't go as planned, but I think if you start grasping a lot of the terminology, it will make a lot more sense. But I offer a lot of information. Labial counseling is the one in English. Psicología somática is the one in Spanish. I try to keep very similar information, but at the same time, I'm very conscious of the difference when I talk in English and Spanish and the information I provide. So even for your clients, I try to make it to where it's digestible for people. So that's all I have. So I know there's a lot of questions that I probably didn't answer, but I'll try to answer a couple before we're able to close this. And thank you so much for staying with us this long.
Hi, Millie. Thank you so much for that information. That is so necessary today. So thank you, because it was an excellent presentation and excellent information. I have a few questions here from the chat. Let me. I'm sorry, I lost it. But how do you help someone who is having nightmares about COVID-19?
A lot of it, you know, it's going to be in asking is information is this person being exposed to. What? Because we can't control it. Our dreams, our nightmares are really just a way for our conscious or what is it that I'm doing? Am I staying at home? Am I taking all the precautions? Am I safe right now? And that's one of the things that a couple of other counselors and myself, we've been talking a lot about, is saying at this moment, I'm safe. At this moment, I am okay. Because our brain is wonderful at creating stories and matching. If we feel a certain way, our brain is going to create a story around it, whether it's true or not. So it's better to redirect that and say, I know I'm scared, but right now I'm safe. And doing that literally throughout your day. I know I'm stressed out about this, but I'm safe. I'm keeping myself safe. I'm doing everything that I can to keep myself out of being, you know, getting this virus. So it's really about that. There's no other way. Right now, we're in a place where we just need to recognize that we're going through it. And I'm glad that they're able to pinpoint that. And it really is a normal thing. So it's not like we're gonna have this how I feel, but let me just remind myself again that I'm safe.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure what are the questions that you already answered from the question and answer section. So I don't know if you want to read them and answer a few of that.
Let me see. Further. Remember. Remember that from past. Yeah, somebody's saying that we need to be mindful of that pets can become victims of mistreatment. And absolutely, that is definitely true. Again, when someone is in a crisis, as I said, logic is out the window. There's no, you can't, the consequences, you're not assessing for them. You're just reacting. So obviously we're trying to prevent that high level of distress. But when somebody is in that situation, yeah, that could happen.
Thank you.
Let's see. A lot of people are just saying, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, everyone.
And I have this question. I don't know if you already answered, but someone is wants if you can explain it again about the psychological arousal. I don't know.
Arousal?
Yes.
When we are under distress, there's 3 responses. There's the fight or flight or freeze. Those are the physiological arousals. So those are the only, and there are survival responses, which means that depending on the history that I have, again, the history that I have growing up, I'm gonna tend to use one of them more than the other ones. Or some of them are not even gonna be an option. I just go to one quickly. So some people will go into fight and they'll fight you. They'll get aggressive, they'll raise their voice, they'll intimidate, and that's their way of protecting themselves. That's the thing that we need to remember. They're doing it to protect themselves. Doesn't excuse the abuse though, but that's where that comes from. There's the flight, which means I walk away, I avoid, I let you speaking and I just walk out of the room. Like if there's an option, I just remove myself from the situation. And that is the fight response. And then is the freeze, where what that means is that if I'm in a situation where somebody's confronting me, I completely just stay quiet and don't move. I just freeze. And that is my coping mechanism to try to survive this situation. So we all have different coping mechanisms. And again, a lot is based with how we grew up and which ones are more available to us. If we come from a house where our parents were very authoritarian and it was what they said, our fight or flight response are probably not going to be available to us as adults. We're going to a freeze and you just stay quiet, go along, and you don't say anything because we didn't grow up exercising those responses. So again, it really depends on the person and where they're at, but those are the physiological responses. But when we are in any of the 3, the fight or flight or freeze, we're in a survival mode. And again, our brain, our logical brain is not online.
Okay, thank you. Well, I don't know if we have more, or Floribella, do you have more questions?
I think that Millie answered them. Not sure if we got all from the chat. I saw that there was a few in the chat, but I don't know if you got those, Kenya.
Only, yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, no, I wasn't really looking at the questions, Millie, when you were answering, so I'm not really sure which ones you answered already. I know that there was a lot of them were asking about the stress levels and anxiety. So I think that was a good topic, and I'm glad that you really talked about everything that you talked today, because it was great information, awesome information, and the way that you present, and we can really see your knowledge and your passion and what you do. Thank you so much for this presentation.
You're welcome.
No, I'm really glad that you were able to help us, because I think that, like I said before at the beginning, we have been working in this community and rural communities, underserved community, migrant communities for many, many years, and we know that we have identified the needs, and many times the children of the underserved communities, usually we go into the fields that we kind of want to build and fulfill those needs that we have identified through our childhoods and our experiences. So I know that this is really a passion. You've done this for so long, and knowing you, I'm really glad that you're part of this project and you're able to help us. So thank you so much. I know that you had a little bit of trouble with your Wi-Fi. I think that, and that's why you put, I learned that really recently, that when you're having trouble with your connection, if you take away your the connection of the actual your camera, you can actually get better signals. So I know that you did that, because I was like, why is she hiding? What is she hiding? But I'm really glad that you're there, and that you were able to come today and join us. And can you put your beautiful face out, Millie, so we can, everybody can see you. And I know that there's a lot of people saying thank you for the great information that you put today, that you brought us. And I'm really happy. I know that there was a little bit of misunderstanding on the date, because we usually had it on Thursdays. Now we came back to Tuesdays, because this accommodates better. And also because we're also looking in how do we bring other topics that can be very useful for you all. We also have the questions. I want to share the results of the questions that we did today, so everybody knows how we're all feeling. The questions were, how have my sleeping habits changed in the last 2 weeks? Yes, they have. And it really, we can actually see a little bit of what's going on within our own lives. And we just put this questions here just to check on ourselves, because self-care is so super important. And I'm really glad also, Millie, that you share some crisis lines. We always share crisis lines with our partners, collaborators that we work here in Arizona, and also the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And always looking for those connections that we can bring to everybody. And of course, just reminding everybody that next week, it'll be on Tuesday again. Millie is going to be, the topic she's going to be addressing is behavior and emotional care during quarantine.
Ooh.
And I think that that's going to be something that she's going to be enjoying, because she's been working with the healthcare providers in this area, and she's been providing them counseling, and they are the frontline persons working with COVID-19 right now. So thank you, Millie, again, and hope everybody can join us next week. And please let us know if you have any questions. Again, CHIC, the Arizona, Southeast Arizona Area Health Education Center, is in charge of providing us certificates of participation. And they'll be sending to you all that have joined us today, that you have the information, that you register with your own name and your own email. You will be receiving a certificate. Just again, give us a little bit of time, because I think that they're a little bit behind, but I know that they began sending them, because I received some myself. So thank you again, and everybody take care, and hope to see you next week. And again, Millie, thank you so much, Millie, for helping us, for coming together to bring this awesome topic to our community health workers around the state, around our nation, and really to our communities. And I really appreciate your passion, like I mentioned before, and your knowledge. Thank you for sharing it with us. Kenya, thank you for providing us that support and helping us with the questions. And Eric, so much, thank you for allowing us to learn how to use webinars, the Zoom. We are coming together to learn to provide this service to you all. Thank you again.
Thank
See you
you.
next week.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Millie. Thank you, Flor. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, everyone. Be safe.